Good morning, everybody. I will call the Transportation Committee meeting for Friday, June 3rd, 2022 to order. As permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration of May 27th, 2022, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee. To ensure that the meeting is as transparent as possible, we posted the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance. We'll provide a recording of this meeting linked on CMAP's website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. I would like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast, of course. Committee members, please remember to state your name when you're making a motion or second, just to help us with that. And Lindsay will go ahead and call the roll.
Okay, I will start with Chuck Abraham. I saw, but Darwin Burkhart, Kevin Carrier.
I'm here. Good morning, everyone.
Lynette Ciavarella.
Here.
Michael Connolly, or Leah, CTA. John Paul Deepla.
Here.
Sorry, did you hear me?
No, was that Leah?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great, thank you. John Donovan.
Here.
Thank you, John. Doug Ferguson.
Here.
Jessica Hector Sue.
Here.
And Tony Greep. I don't think. Tom Kelso, or I saw Doug DeLeo. Who's in for IDOT OPMP?
Mike Vanderhoff's here, and I see Tom's also here. I haven't checked for Doug yet.
Okay. Heidi Lichtenberger for Kendall County.
Hi, present.
Christina Kopkowski.
Here.
Eric Llewellyn.
Here.
Chris Hebert.
Here.
Tara Orban.
Here, good morning.
Jessica Ortega, not here. Heidi Persad.
Good morning, present.
Good. IDOT D1, John Basic.
Yep, here.
Jackie Forbes for King County.
Morning, I'm here.
And it's Mayor Rockingham in. Joe Chauffeur.
Good morning, I'm here.
Morning. Vig Krishnamurthy. And John Loper in for DuPage County.
Here.
P.S. Siraj. Thomas Dow. Audrey Wennick.
Here.
And Rocco Zucchero.
Good morning, present.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. Let's move on to agenda item 2, agenda changes and announcements. We don't have any agenda changes this morning, but do we have any announcements? No announcements. All right, let's go ahead and move on to item 3, approval of the minutes. I'll take a motion.
Can I add something before you move?
Sure.
I did review the minutes, and I thought it was interesting that none of the conversation that we had was captured. That was one of the more engaged conversations that we'd had since I've participated in Transportation Committee, and there was a lot listed in terms of the public comment. It was on a similar topic, but nothing, it just says the agenda item was discussed. And I'm wondering if there could be an explanation about why none of our conversation was captured.
So, Jessica, I can answer that. If starting last year, we made a change to the way the minutes were being handled, where we were only capturing the substance of the item itself, and then if any action was taken. Especially with the meetings being recorded and available, they're all publicly on our CMAP's YouTube site, so they can be watched and viewed at any point in time. It's not to say that the conversation wasn't important, but there was no actual action taken. So it's it's different from an actual running down of everything that was said in the meeting to more just if there were actions taken.
Okay. Thanks for the explanation.
That's a great question, Leah. As I had noticed the change as well when it was previously made, and learned similar to what Doug just shared with us, that the recordings being available is kind of the record of discussion. Can we have a motion on this?
So moved.
Thank you, Joe. Can we have a second?
This is Rocco. I'll second.
Thank you, Rocco. Lindsay, go ahead and take the vote.
Okay, and I got a note from Chuck that he is not able to voice his presence, but if you could send me a chat for your vote on the minutes, I will make note of it. And then I will move on to Kevin Carrier.
Aye.
Lynette Ciavarella,
Aye.
Leah Mooney,
Aye.
John Paul Dietla,
Aye.
Doug Ferguson,
Aye.
Jessica Hector Sue,
Aye.
Tom Kelso or Mike Bender. I think, Mike, you might have to vote.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was muted. I'll vote for Tom today. Aye.
Thank you. Heidi Lichtenberger,
Aye.
Christina Kapkowski,
Yes.
Eric Llewellyn,
Aye.
Tara Orban,
Aye.
Heidi Prasad,
Aye.
John Basic,
Aye.
Jackie Forbes,
Aye.
Joe Schofer,
Aye.
and John Loper,
Aye.
Audrey Wennick,
Aye.
Rocco Zucchero,
Yes.
and I see that we've got Jeff Shriver in for Vig.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was delayed. Yeah, yes, for the city, for Vig.
Okay, thank you.
Fantastic, motion carries. Let's go ahead and move on to item 4, CMAP board meeting updates. For this item, Executive Director Allman will give us an update on the CMAP agency and board activities. So off to you, Erin.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. We have our board meetings and our MPO meetings next week, Wednesday and Thursday, so it'll be a busy week. I think based on what happened between your last meeting and this meeting today, the board met and talked about, saw roughly the same agenda that you saw in terms of some of the draft benefits report, and heard from some stakeholders similarly to you heard previously about 2050. I think the one thing that I just wanted to touch on here this morning was just a little bit of the work that we've been doing with our implementers around coordination for some of the major infrastructure grants that are available through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So we had coordinated a virtual meeting this week. These short weeks always get me. On Wednesday, at the request of Senator Durbin's office, to bring partners together for a briefing on 2 of the mega project applications from our region. The one was for Union Station, and the other one was the joint project that CTA and IDOT are submitting for what we've sort of been calling behind the scenes the Blue Ike project, not officially designated that, but that coordinated effort. So those 2 projects, I think, have really good multimodal goals and impact communities and the goods movement of our region in a meaningful way. So we have been trying to emphasize with our delegation the real importance of investing in these 2 projects across the region. I think our plan really is that, moving forward, we will be working and reaching out with you all to start mapping out what else from our region should be going after different competitive grant opportunities here, so that we can make sure that we have sort of not just what the plan does is has like a big list of projects, but we haven't necessarily prioritized them based on funding availability and the ability of the projects to meet the objectives of the new programs like Raise, like Chrissy, like Infra, all of those things. So our intent is to have some workshops with you all and your staffs, not at the Transportation Committee, but at a workshop that we would have where we talk about like what's ready to go, when is it ready to go, how much money do we need, should we be thinking jointly about some of these things regionally as well. So that is in the works and will be coming to fruition here soon. We've heard also from the business and civic communities that they would love to have sort of a list of top regional priorities that they too can take to elected officials and take to DC and advocate for on our behalf. So some exciting stuff, I think, coming forward, moving, that will happen over the next coming months. I think the first goal was really to get over that hurdle of the mega grant and for grant applications. There was also a mega grant application put forth by Metra for a UP line, looking at some of the bridges that are up there, I know. And then also there was an infra project for the CREATE project, which I think was WA1, that they had applied for the Chrissy funding. And we also recently found that the Chrissy, there was no Chrissy grant funding awarded to Northeastern Illinois. There was one project, but I think it was more Central Illinois. So again, we want to make sure that we're not submitting 30 requests for every competitive grant program, but that we're thinking about that strategic approach. So we'll be in touch with many of you in the coming weeks about that. The other thing that I wanted to touch on here too is the Regional Transportation Authority, the RTA CMAP legislation that recently passed. So the governor signed legislation that requires CMAP, the RTA to work together, and our MPO policy committee in coordination with RTA's board to develop and submit a report of legislative recommendations to the governor and the General Assembly January 1st, 2024. The law will require that recommendations address the long-term financial challenges to our regional transit system, along with looking at some of the other, I think, things that are near and dear to the conversations we've been having, like, measures that aim to move people safely, securely, cleanly, efficiently, and really fosters and supports that coordinated and efficient land use that's necessary for our transportation system to be successful in moving people to jobs and home and healthcare and all of the places people need to go. So I know that our staffs have been working well together on this. I think we are looking at the work that we're already doing under our mobility recovery work. I know, Jessica, feel free to weigh in here too, is that through your strategic planning process, I think we've got a lot of the pieces mapped out here that need to happen. And, I think that sets us off in a good spot to be able to achieve this goal of delivering this report to the General Assembly January 1st, 2024. I think of critical importance on this work is that it's not just sort of providing that report to the General Assembly. I think the budget figures that RTA and the projections and the modeling of where we're going to be in a couple of years in regards to transit operations is pretty abysmal. And we really need to just not only think about this as a report, but an opportunity for us to really go back and say, well, how do we fund transit operations as a region here? And so again, I think it will require collective voices from around this table, from our MPO, from our board as well, but we'll be driving towards that over the coming years. Jessica, did you want to add anything from the RTA perspective on that?
I think you really covered it well, Erin. Yeah, I mean, we already work together a lot, and I think we're going to continue working together. As I've said before at this meeting, this Transportation Committee and Policy Committee are one of the two forums in the region where we can get together with not only our transit partners, but all of you to talk about these issues. And we will have staff coming later this year to come to Transportation Committee and share a little bit more about the strategic planning work that we're doing alongside our staff at CMAP that are working on recovery planning and the On to 2050 update that we're going to talk about later today. But yeah, we definitely have some challenges ahead that we're all going to need to work together on, and we look forward to being able to do that. And in 2023, I think the exciting thing about working with CMAP will be really pushing for action. And I think this year is going to be heavy in planning and kind of thinking through what we want to do and kind of bringing together stakeholders to get an idea of what an appetite is for change and an appetite for being able to find find funding solutions. And then in 2023, I think we'll really be working with CMAP on action and thinking about, okay, what do we need to do between now and 2025 when the federal relief dollars that we have start to run out. So that's where we are on our side.
Yeah, no, thanks for adding that, Jessica. I appreciate it. That's it for me. I'm happy to answer questions or that you might have about our work or anything that's on your mind related to some of the items that I mentioned.
I just have
Questions for Erin? Go ahead,
Jen, I missed some of the, it was a really fast list of grant applications. Would you mind just doing a recap, Erin, of like what all was applied for? I know there was beyond the mega that IDOT and CTA put together for the combined Forest Park Branch and I-290 project. I know there was
Metro had put together a mega application for UP, one of their UP lines. Lynette, I see you on there, so I'm going to ask if you could
Sure.
get the details right.
Sure, that's the Union Pacific North Line Bridge project.
And then the I believe City of Chicago sponsored CREATE project, or maybe it's the CREATE Partners went in for the WA1 CREATE project.
Yeah, IDOT OIPA was the actual submitter for that one, but on behalf of all the CREATE partners.
Thanks, Jeff.
Was that it? Was there was an Amtrak one that was out there too, right?
Amtrak Union Station went in for mega as well. And I believe it was Amtrak and state sponsored, but I do believe they got money from Michigan DOT because they're working on some of the issues related to that the Cook County, City of Chicago also were contributors, and IDOT for that project.
Metro was also a contributor.
Thank you, Lynette.
And those were all
infra
mega or
application too.
both? Sorry, Jeff. Those were mega or infra or both?
Well, it's a joint application, but the CREATE project went for infra. I believe that Metro went for the Union Pacific North for the mega.
Yeah, ours was mega. The Amtrak application was mega.
We also had an infra application for a series of bridges over the Calumet River. 4 bridges.
Thanks, Jeff. Oh, thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Erin. Let's go ahead and move on to agenda item 5, items for approval. We have 2 items for approval today. The first is the federal fiscal year 2019 to 2024 TIP amendments and administrative modifications. And for this, we will have Russell.
Okay, good morning. Included in your packet today is a memo detailing the 135 TIP changes contained in formal TIP Amendment 22-06 and the 134 TIP changes contained in administrative amendments 22-06.1 and 22-06.2. As seen in the memo, formal amendments resulted in an increase of $632 million in total project costs for all prior, current, and future years. While most of the new projects were IDOT maintenance projects, there are a few transit projects that I wanted to highlight that are the kind of projects that are laying the groundwork for significant improvements and changes in the region for years to come. The CTA has a new project for $14.5 million in federal fiscal year 22 for significant electrical upgrades, installation of charger infrastructure, and general updates to the garages to support the conversion to full electrification of the bus fleet. Metro has a similar project in 2022 for $15.75 million for engineering and design to prepare yard facilities to accommodate zero emissions technologies. And the CTA has a new project for $35.5 million also in federal fiscal year 22 to complete the 100% design plan for 6 CTA rail stations and also provides for elevator replacement. So we have both ADA improvements and we have things related to climate and resiliency and things of that nature that are being prepared for and planned as we see in the TIP. Administrative amendments added $65.35 million to the TIP in all prior, current, and future years. Primarily this came from new projects. The net change for the total cost in the TIP from all amendments resulted in $697.5 million being added to the TIP in prior, current, and future years. As shown in the memo, New projects such as the ones I highlighted and the addition or removal of project phases comprise most of the formal changes. Administrative amendments were more evenly distributed amongst AC and ACC changes, cost changes, and schedule changes. The amendments, along with the memo, were posted on May 24th for committee and public review. Approval of formal TIP Amendment 22-06 is requested, and I can answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Russell. Any questions for Russell on the TIP amendments?
This is Audrey. I do have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
I have a question about a specific project, kind of as an example of a project type. So I'm noticing there are some roadway expansions in this TIP list. For example, the expansion of on Buckley Road for 3.5 miles. And I am conscious of the safety record that we have in the state of Illinois in terms of state routes having the largest number of traffic fatalities in the state, a large increase in fatalities, and also that pedestrian fatalities were at their 5-year high last year. I'm noting that this project, as an example, is right next to the Prairie Crossing Metro Station. There's housing right across the street from the Prairie Crossing Metro Station. There's also a bicycle path that is crossing this roadway that is proposed to be widened. And so I just want to understand this is a $70 million project with a 12% cost increase represented in this TIP. Before we continue on with projects like these, I want to raise the issue with the group of what type of safety impacts and benefits we can expect from projects like this. There are also some others that involve widening intersections and adding turn lanes, et cetera. But I'm just concerned that widenings like this may be continuing to degrade the safety performance of our state, which has been going in the wrong direction. And I wanted to see if perhaps the project sponsor could speak to that.
Well, I'm assuming the project sponsor for that project is IDOT?
Yes.
Okay. So, Mr.
Yeah,
Weasley?
this is John. Can you hear me? Okay.
You can. Yep, we can hear you perfectly.
Yeah, with regard to the projects like that safe, congestion can be a safety issue as well, and adding capacity can improve safety. For multiple modes, but what we do when we do add lanes on a project like Route 83, we are working very carefully to make sure that we've got, we are trying to keep those crossings smaller as much as possible, tightening radiuses, using corner islands to kind of provide those intermediary kind of connection points across the wider cross sections. We certainly are providing the larger, ladder bar type crosswalk markings, and just designing them to accommodate the safe pedestrian crossings. I mean, the pedestrian crossings are happening today. And that specific location is kind of different because it's very rural looking and very rural feeling because there aren't direct access points along Buckley Road in that area. So the intersection right there at I actually forgot the name of the road there, but it's an extension of Midlothian Road. But bottom line, you provide the crosswalk, you provide locations where the pedestrians can cross, where they're expected to be, and that should make it safer rather than having other locations where I think a big safety issue is the concern where pedestrians are crossing mid-block, uncontrolled, unprotected, and I think this type of situation would not be unsafe by any stretch. And as far as other roadway crossings and other roadway widenings, we are working with the communities on new strategies. We actually have expanded the department's own policies have expanded to include much more unique and innovative, at least to our our perspective, ways to cross the roadways, providing mid-block locations where we normally didn't. In the past, we did not support that because there were safety concerns. But we've got now new strategies taking the lead from agencies like CDOT on how to get those pedestrians across safely. We're growing in that arena, and I feel like we're doing a better job. And going forward, we're going to utilize and implement those latest strategies to make sure that we're providing safety for those crossings.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that response. One follow-up question: does IDOT do before and after studies of its projects in terms of the safety outcomes, before and then actually tracking the safety outcomes like for the 5 years after you do an improvement like this?
Programmatically, we do not, but we have on a case-by-case basis. For example, we have been actually tracking safety of an interchange that was built on 80 Elmhurst Road at I-90. It's a diverging diamond interchange, as well as the one at I-50, the one at 59 at I-88 down in Naperville. To just track, how they are operating. So, we do on a case by case to understand that a little bit better. And so, we have done them, but programmatically we do not. But we do track safety, regularly. We're always kind of looking at safety, and we, kind of track the high crash locations and those injury locations, and are always looking to improve and identify low cost type improvements to those areas where safety is a growing concern and whatnot. So, we certainly are always cognizant of safety, but to specifically answer your question, no, we don't programmatically track post-construction safety.
And I would just like to add, this is Tara Orban from Cook County. I would just like to add to John's comments, just as another implementing agency, the projects that we're approving in the TIP today are part of the federal aid process. And safety evaluation is intrinsic to that process, as well as public involvement. So, I can speak personally to the projects that we're involved in terms of, our public meetings, our outreach. We are looking for input on where the needs are from users of the facility, not just those that drive cars or trucks, but the non-motorized traffic. And what the phase 1 study sets out to do is to, identify problem areas and implement solutions. And as you said, John, having uncontrolled crossings is one of the biggest safety hazards that we have. So, as part of a phase 1 study, there is a section on safety where we look back at the trailing 5 years worth of crashes, where we do an analysis of the there's crash diagrams that are prepared. We look at time of day, weather, what are the contributing factors, and what, as part of the capital project that we're moving forward with, what's in the toolbox that we can use to put forward. So what I can speak to, Audrey, is just that there is a process that's intrinsic to the federal aid study, phase 1 study that's being completed, where we do evaluate that. There are actually crash modification factors. So speaking to the study, there are there's like a CMF clearinghouse that, where we say, okay, well, if we implement this solution, we can anticipate crashes will be reduced by whatever percent. So happy to speak with you about that offline more, Audrey, but I just wanted to, to shed a little bit more light on how it is intrinsic to the federal aid process. Thank you.
Thanks, Tara and John and Audrey for the great question. Other questions from anybody?
Can I ask, actually, I have a quick follow-up now just about the federal aid safety process. And Tara, thanks for that explanation. What type of analysis is included in that? Because of all the sort of Vision Zero kind of improvements that CDOT's been working on, it seems like some of the most important are road narrowing and lane narrowing, because when people feel comfortable, when they have more space, they feel more comfortable to drive fast, and the speeds are really what is most alarming. All of the roadways that I personally have experienced lately as feeling extremely unsafe are IDOT jurisdiction roads. And I don't know to what, I'm thinking like North Milwaukee, where Pace runs their Pulse service, to Devon Avenue, in the sort of Edgebrook area where you see kids, toddlers wandering as people are driving 80 miles an hour, literally having drag races as kids are getting ice cream cones, to over by Superdog, you know what I mean? Just like all these different places, to over by my house where I walk my dogs on Foster, where I don't even like to go there because I'm afraid somebody's going to jump the curb like they did on Peterson, where they killed the woman in the bus stop, also an IDOT jurisdiction roadway. So what kinds of, when you're doing the federal safety, what are the elements that are considered? Because I feel like a lot of times, like when we've been looking at like the North Lake Shore Drive study, we've actually talked about widening lanes there to be safer, but then that gives people this sense of, it's safer to speed. So how do we balance that, and what elements are they looking?
So in terms of the analysis, so just in general, I mean, in terms of the analysis that's done, we look at the past 5 years of crashes. And again, all the crash reports are provided, looked at, like, again, we look at what are the contributing factors to the crashes, and that as part of and within the scope of work for the project. So if you're doing a recon, it's different than if you're doing like 3-hour rehabilitation or pavement preservation, you know what I mean? So within the scope of the work, what are, some crash mitigation factors that can be employed? So it's looking at crash history, identification of patterns, causal factors, and then what would be mitigations, for that, whatever pattern that you see, whether it's, and you can't design for, illegal behavior, such as a run off the road crash, right? I mean, if someone goes over the curb, that's something we take into consideration, but that's not something we can, that would be like one instance, right? Rather than a pattern of instances. So I think you speak to some behavioral issues and some enforcement issues, but then within the scope of the study, those are the things that we look at in terms of the design of the roadway.
And just as a follow-up to that, I think one of the things that I read, interestingly enough, recently was just about that run off the road, and how there's kind of a traffic engineer sort of safety zone that's sometimes considered in terms of where certain infrastructure is located, right? Like assuming that there might be these sort of run off the road incidents, some like street lights are created such that they can collapse in a certain zone, so that the driver of the vehicle that's driving recklessly with poor behavior at high rates of speed wouldn't be killed by hitting the light pole. But that is the same zone in which we have pedestrians waiting to cross the street, and in which we have our bus stops. So that bus shelter was actually in one of the zones that would have been used as that sort of run off the road area. And I wonder if maybe we had narrower lanes and a wider parkway there with this setback of the bus stop, if that would have been the case. I think there are some street designs that we can do to manage some of these behaviors. I would just drop that in. It was a great article. I'll share that if I can find it again.
Okay.
If I could jump in too.
Yeah, Kevin, go ahead. Yep.
Well, yeah, sorry, Aaron, if you want to jump in, feel free. But one thing I was going to bring up too, I think some of the stuff we're hearing a little bit out of the safety task force too, that CMAP's working on, and interested in seeing some of those outcomes, because we've seen it, I think, nationwide. It's not even a local issue, but nationwide speeding, and even more so for us, that we've seen is aggressive driving, right? So people not only driving fast, but getting agitated or whatever and driving aggressively. But so I think, yeah, design is one part of it, but I think, trying to, whether it's enforcement or education, or how are we going to address those, those human behaviors is kind of another side of it too. But interesting, we just had on one of our projects, we did a little analysis because we got some questions. We were going from 2 lanes to 3 lanes and doing like a center turn lane, and we got some questions from the public, or concerns that, is this going to increase speeding and stuff like that. So we went back and looked at some projects where we did some similar widenings, 2 to 3 lanes, or even 2 lanes to 5 lanes. And we looked at our speed studies before and after, and we didn't see a correlation. Surprisingly, we had one section of road where we went from 2 lanes to 5 lanes on our Washington Street corridor, and the 85th percentile speed went down by 3 miles an hour. I can't tell you why that happened. It was counterintuitive, but the speeding is also, the roadside condition. Are we in a suburban area, urban area versus a rural area where people feel like more prone to speeding and things like that too. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into it, but lane widths, we try to tighten up lane widths where we can and do traffic calming measures and stuff like that too to help address these things. So like kind of piggybacking on what Tara's saying, there's a whole lot of tools in the toolbox, and we kind of look at each situation and all the different crash patterns and try to find out, what's the most appropriate tool to try to help, slow people down or make the conditions when they do go off the road, try to make them safer. Like you said, Leah, the clear zone, making sure trees and impediments aren't in that area so people can recover or not have a serious injury or worse yet, a fatal. So I just want to add into the discussion there a little bit. Sorry.
Can I add in as well? This is Joe Schofer.
Sure.
I think it's really important that we take seriously and adopt a mandate to do ex post evaluation of a broader range of interventions, particularly in the last comment where you get a counterintuitive result. It really begs the question what's going on, and just so this warrants data collection, it warrants analysis. A lot of the data collection is automatic in the sense that we're getting crash data and traffic volume data, and in a lot of cases speed data, but not doing anything with this on a systematic basis, I think is a real mistake. This is a national issue. There are a variety of initiatives underway at the moment to delve into this in more detail. There was a lot unknown, and we're sitting on top of natural experiments that are happening daily as we tinker with the transportation system, and it's imperative that we learn from them.
Jessica, if I could hop in here too. I was sort of going to echo what Kevin was saying, but Joe, I think you have a good point. There's lots of opportunity, even Audrey, your comment about sort of before and after, right? When you make an improvement, what are we looking at systematically across our region? This begs sort of sets off the little light in my brain that perhaps next month we need to bring Vicki back to provide a recap on the safety working group that we have ongoing. I know they're getting close to completion of their speed management paper, but they're looking at sort of the safe systems approach. And then we also have our, some new data that we're looking at too, that I think would be of value to this discussion. So that has been active, and I know that there's probably a lot of good stuff in there that this committee would enjoy. So we'll make a note to bring that back to you all.
And I can confirm that that's already been penciled in for next month's or July's agenda.
Perfect.
Great. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, I think this is a good example of how we can continue to tie together some of the policy things that we work on with the actual administrative actions that we work on. So the CHIP being very administrative sometimes doesn't afford an easy opportunity for us to talk about these things, but I appreciate, Audrey, that you brought up the question, because it is a point for us to ask, how are we approving projects that make it into the TIP, and how do we follow them throughout the life of the project so that we know kind of what we're spending our money on. So thanks for the question, Audrey. Let's go ahead and take a motion. Russell, do you want to add anything before we close this out?
No, I think we've covered quite a bit, so I think we're good.
Okay, great. Can we go ahead and take a motion to approve these 2 TIP amendments?
Tara Orban, so
Thanks.
moved.
Thank you. Can I have a second?
I'll second it, Jessica.
Great. Second by Carrier. Lindsay, let's go ahead and take the roll call vote.
Okay, Chuck, if you can send a message in the chat or voice it. And then I will go to Kevin.
Aye.
Carrier. Lynette Ciavarella.
Aye.
Leah Mooney.
Aye.
John Paul Dipla.
Aye.
Doug Ferguson.
Aye.
Jessica Hector Sue.
Aye.
Mike Vanderhoef.
Aye.
Heidi Lichtenberger.
Aye.
Christina Kopkowski.
Yes.
Eric Llewellyn.
Aye.
Sorry, I missed you last time. Chris Hebert.
Aye. No worries.
Tara Orban.
Aye.
Heidi Persad.
Aye.
John Basic.
Aye.
Jackie Forbes.
Aye.
Joe Schofer.
Aye.
Jeff Shriver. John Loper.
Aye.
Audrey Wenink.
Aye.
And Rocco Zucchero.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you. The motion carries. Let's go ahead and move on to item 5.2, the fiscal year 2023 sub-area funding allocations memo for the transit federal formula funds. For this, we'll have Terry Dixon.
Good morning, everyone. Before you this morning is a request for your recommendation of endorsement of the federal fiscal year 2022 full year apportionment, sections 5307, 5340, 5337, 5339, and 5310 sub-area funding allocations between Illinois, Indiana, and Illinois, Wisconsin that was published on the federal website on April 7th. The RTA Board of Directors has approved the allocations between Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission and the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission at their May 19th, 2022 board meeting. The service board splits are provided for your information. So therefore, the staff is requesting that the Transportation Committee recommend MPO endorsement of the funding allocations at their June meeting.
Thank you, Terry. Any questions from anyone? Matt? No. All right, let's go ahead and take a motion.
I'll move.
Thank you, Lynette. Can I have a second?
Forbes, second.
Thank you, Jackie. Let's go ahead and take another roll call, Lindsay.
Okay, we've got Chuck Abraham. I'll wait for a chat. Kevin Carrier.
Aye.
Lynette Ciavarella.
Aye.
Leah Mooney.
Aye.
John Paul Deepla.
Aye.
Doug Ferguson.
Aye.
Jessica Hector Sue.
Aye.
Mike Bender.
Aye.
Heidi Lichtenberger.
Aye.
Christina Kopkowski.
Yes.
Eric Llewellyn.
Aye.
Chris Hebert.
Aye.
Tara Orban.
Aye.
Heidi Persad.
Aye.
John Basic.
Aye.
Jackie Forbes.
Aye.
Joe Schofer.
Aye.
Jeff Shriver. John Loper.
Aye.
Audrey Wenink.
Aye.
And Rocco Zucchero.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay and everyone. Motion carries. Let's move on to item 6, information items. We have several information items for today. The first will be an Onto 2050 plan update. And for this, we have Elizabeth Scott and Jonathan Birch giving us an update. So off to you, Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Yeah, thank you. I think it's actually just going to be me giving the update today, but Jonathan is here on the phone, as well as our number of our other colleagues who've worked on this project in case there are questions that I am not able to answer. But anyway, getting into it. Hi, I think I know most of you, but for those I haven't interacted with a lot, I'm Elizabeth Scott. I'm a principal policy analyst in CMAP's Plan Implementation and Legislative Affairs Division. And I, along with Jonathan Birch, have been helping to shepherd along the update to the Onto 2050 plan, which was provided to you in your meeting materials for today. CMAP is getting into position to release these documents for public comment through the summer. And so what I wanted to do today is come back, subsequent to our last conversation, which was really about regionally significant projects, and talk to you about what are the elements in the plan update that are going to be available for review, to talk about the timeline and like order of operations in terms of what happens next if you want to be more engaged in the comment and review process, and then for us to have a brief discussion of what CMAP should be thinking about as we begin scoping the successor plan for Onto 2050, which is an item in the FY23 work plan. And then finally, get any reflections, questions, or discussion from the group about the materials that have been provided or the process to this point. So that's kind of the plan for the next 30-ish minutes. Next slide, please. So on the timeline, here we are today on June 3rd. So as I mentioned, the materials have been provided to you all in your packet for today. So that includes a number of things that I'll go over. The order of operations is that next, the draft materials will go to CMAP's board and the MPO next week, where they'll be asked to approve it to be released for public comment. Assuming that goes according to plan, the public comment period will open on June 10th. It'll run through August 13th, including a public hearing in the evening on August 11th, sort of near the end of the public comment period. Throughout all of that, staff will be working to incorporate comments that members of the public, civic partners and other implementers make to us. And in your September meeting of the Transportation Committee, you can expect that we'll come back to you and summarize the comments that we received and what actions, if any, CMAP took. And then finally, the plan is for all of this to come together in a package that will be submitted to the board and MPO for adoption on October 12th in their joint meeting. So just that is the roadmap from here, and those are the key dates for those of you who are interested. Next slide, please. And so today, kind of as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about what is in the plan update narrative, and then what are the different appendices, and kind of what do they contribute to the process overall. Broadly speaking, there are a number of quantitative exercises that help us refresh our data tools, project the future, speak with implementers about project needs, and then reassess the transportation needs in the region. There's also some qualitative activities, that we've undertaken to look back at past successes, think about the policies put forward in Onto 2050, and in this case, and affirm their enduring value. Another thing I wanted to note here at the beginning too is that we've put all of these materials on our homepage, and I believe they will remain on our homepage through the end of public comment, and that's in response to our discussion with this group in the last meeting that it was hard to find materials in our agenda materials. So hopefully you'll be happy to see that we have tried to make it as accessible as possible in response to that. Next slide, please. So it is very difficult to make a flow chart of the different activities that are done for regional long-range transportation plan update, because many of them are simultaneous and interwoven. But I tried to kind of lay them out left to right in terms of when we start working on them, but they do all converge here at this moment. And part of what I'm going to go over is what is each of these things, what do they contribute, how does it sort of all come together conceptually. But something to know is that there are basically 10 different projects, including public and stakeholder engagement, with their own project teams And, even though this was by no means a level of effort similar to the original Onto 2050 plan, it did take, more than a dozen staff, hundreds of hours to do this work, just to give you a sense of scale. So next slide, please. And so I want to start our discussion about the narrative with just what can you expect to find in the Onto 2050 update summary document that is linked. It's really divided into four sections. The first section talks about the experience of the last 4 years and contextualizes the principles of Onto 2050 being inclusive growth, prioritized investment, and resilience in the experience of the last 4 years. So it talks about how much the experience of COVID reaffirmed. Yeah, somebody is not muted. In any case, it talked about the experience of COVID and how much that showed us that resilience investments continue to be important. It talked about the movement for racial justice and in context of why investments that create better access to opportunity for people and work to eliminate racism and systematic inequalities in our region are important. And then finally talks about the prioritized investment in the context of, on the one hand, the generational financial resources that have come down to us through IIJA and Rebuild Illinois, but also reaffirms the enduring need to find long-term sustainable funding for the transportation system. It also celebrates some successes that the region has had, some of which CMAP has had a role in, and some of which it hasn't, which we'll talk about here next. It summarizes the key findings from our technical activities, all of which are included in far greater detail as appendices to the summary. And then it has a section entitled Where We Go From Here, talking about what CMAP's thoughts are thus far about where we need to dig in for the next plan that we'd also like to engage you with in that discussion here at the end of the meeting. And then you'll see on the right an example of the type of information that's provided or highlighted through this sort of brief discussion. The 2020 census showed us that for the first time, people of color are the majority in this region, and thinking about what that means for the future and the planning that we continue to do. So next slide, please. So thinking about some of the successes, there are quite a few more in the document that we shared with you, but just to highlight a few and give you a sense of the kinds of things we're talking about here. In terms of our prosperity recommendations, CMAP has almost completed, in partnership with the Illinois International Port District, the master plan for the port. It's set to be adopted later this month. And through that process and with the partnership of particularly Cook County and the City of Chicago, IDOT and IDNR, we have secured $22 million from Rebuild Illinois to rebuild important facilities at the port, and are well on the way to doing a multimodal rail yard expansion and developing a bike and pedestrian path across the lake, which has been a huge barrier in the community for many years. So lots of excitement and good things happening there. Next slide, please. On the environment side, both at the state and national level through the Clean and Equitable Jobs Act here in Illinois, and through IIJA at the national level, there are a lot of resources coming through that can help support clean energy transition in the transportation sector and in other areas. And CMAP has put in the work to begin the technical activities that we need to do to be able to leverage these resources. So we're updating our greenhouse gas inventory. We are working on a regional transportation vulnerability assessment, which has to do with the vulnerability of our various assets to flood, heat, and other climate-related issues. And then we're also working on a regional EV charging strategy. So all of these things are, you know, kind of starting to accelerate and come together, and it's great to see resources available there. Next slide, please. In terms of our community recommendations, one great thing that we want to celebrate is that the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus has established an age-friendly communities collaborative, which is going to be a space for peer exchange, policy development, and you know, resource advocacy to support aging in place and the needs of older people in our communities. As many of you may be aware, as the baby boomer generation ages, we are going to be having a far greater share of people over the age of 65 in this region than we ever had before, or even in this country ever have had before. So thinking about what are the needs of those populations going to be in terms of the built environment, in terms of the transportation system going forward, this is a collaborative that's going to help address that here in Northeastern Illinois. Next slide, please. And so in terms of governance recommendations, one thing CMAP has done that we're very proud of is stand up a capacity building program through our local technical assistance. We checked the agenda through our local technical assistance team. The capacity building program does a number of things. It has provided embedded staff planners in high need communities to come and be the planner for communities like Sauk Village and Calumet City to help them figure out their planning needs and secure grants. We're also standing up pieces of work that will help implement plans that have been created by CMAP and others, and then specifically focus on capital improvement programs and getting resources for those capital improvement programs, particularly in communities that don't have the staff capacity to compete in the way that some others have. So this is an area of work that we're very excited about and has a lot to do with our equity commitments and is already showing a lot of fruit in terms of the, you know, I think we got about $4 million in grants for Calumet Park. And yeah, further than that, we've gotten multiple millions of dollars of grants already through this effort. And it's also supported by from philanthropy from the MacArthur Foundation. Next slide, please. And there are a lot of things to celebrate on the mobility front, as you all are very well aware, but one I wanted to remind and highlight, which is something that was implemented closer to the adoption of On2 2050, is the Region's STP Shared Fund, which is taking, I think, 15% of the region's overall STP funds and allocating it to multi-jurisdictional projects that have regional importance and help, you know, drive the kind of outcomes that we're committed to together as a region. And so here I'm sharing a picture of the Austin Avenue station improvements from CTA's ASAP accessibility project, which is being funded with $14 million in this cycle. But there's a number of other projects that are also being supported. And maybe if one of the staff can put that list in the chat, if anybody would be interested to look at that, that could be good. Next slide, please. So those are just a few successes. You can read the plan update document if you want to see more. There's a lot of kind of links and things if there are things you're not familiar with that you can read and find out. But we want to, you know, as much as we know that the region has a lot to do and a lot before us, we want to make sure that we take time to celebrate areas where we have worked together successfully and we have made progress. So that's a piece of the narrative, and that kind of gives you a sense, hopefully, of what the narrative is about. And now I'm going to kind of turn more towards the technical pieces of the plan update and try and give you a sense, if you're not familiar, like what each one of these things really is. And so maybe then you can decide whether you want to dig more deeply into the various appendices. Excuse me. So one of the first things that we do is update the region's socioeconomic forecast. So this is forecast of employment and jobs in the year 2050 or the plan horizon year, and then in key sort of 5-year increments back from that. And it's a MPO requirement that we do this, but also it's very important because it sets the frame for a lot of our other technical activities. So we do two separate forecasts, one of employment, one of jobs. We used some outside vendors to help us with some of the technical components. But basically how it works is we get a regional level population forecast, regional level jobs forecast, and then we go through a process to allocate that forecast down to the regional scale and actually even to the quarter mile scale to try and understand how we can anticipate the location of people and jobs to change. Because obviously, when we're thinking about what transportation systems or investments are needed in the future, having some sense of where people will be needs to be a piece of how we make that decision. So we did that. One thing that was new for this cycle is that we are using, CMAP is now using an urban sim micro simulation land use program. And so that assesses a number of things, including zoning, including household behavior, including developer behavior, to try and figure out how different packages of sort of activities or investment might change the distribution of people and jobs in the region. So we use urban sim with the regional number to get an idea of, at a fairly fine grain level of detail across the region, what's going to change. And then we put that information into the travel demand model. So next slide, please. And so travel demand model, which I would imagine most of you are fairly well familiar. It's a model that tries to understand or predict where trips are made in the region, where are they going, why are they going there, what mode is being used, what time of day are the trips happening. And this is an analytical tool that once we update and calibrate it, we can use to assess regionally significant projects, to do aspects of conformity analysis, to do all kinds of other analysis, including, like, for instance, our mobility recovery project has a heavily relied on our travel modeling team and the data that they could provide. So we need to, when we have new population and jobs numbers, we need to update the travel model. We also in this cycle did a survey, primary source survey of a very detailed survey of travel activity in the region. And so incorporated information from that My Daily Travel survey, from Urban Sim in the forecast, and then some technological improvements that the team implemented to stand up and calibrate or refresh travel demand model to use in the evaluation of RSPs and other things. So next slide, please. And as we've discussed more recently, a big aspect of this whole long-range transportation plan update is obviously the effort to refresh the regionally significant projects list. As you all know, these are large projects that have a significant impact in the region and therefore warrant additional kind of consideration through the regional planning process. They represent capital investments in the region's transit system, expressways, and arterials. And so we get the proposals from implementers, including most or many of you all. We then evaluate the projects, including through the travel demand model, but also through a variety of other quantitative exercises. We get performance across all of these indicators, and then the staff look at the indicators and determine whether or not to constrain, which is to say, put the project on a list that's considered to be ready for the region to support, or to ask it to wait for more information or more study. And so in this cycle, where we're sitting right now, we have 71 RSPs constrained, 21 transit projects, 25 expressway projects, 25 arterial projects. The vast majority of these are from the original On-to 2050 plan, with a few notable exceptions. And as a reminder, we use the same evaluative criteria and the same evaluative process that we established through a consensus-built process for On-to 2050 here for this update. Next slide, please. Another piece of this, which is sort of concurrent to the forecast and travel demand model, pieces is for us to update our analysis of system performance and targets and set new targets where necessary. CMAP has a responsibility to set federal performance targets, and they inform onto 2050 policy priorities, long-range plan indicators, and financial priorities. And so we do this work in the area of highway safety, highway condition, system performance, transit asset condition, and transit safety. And so like an example here is that we're taking a look at things like pavement condition in the region and seeing that over the last several years, our share of pavement condition in poor condition has risen to 30%, whereas our goal in 2025 is 5%. And so that lets us know that in terms of maintenance and the resources needed to reach state of good repair, there's going to be an increase there. So there's kind of like a reciprocal relationship between a variety of these different analyses. Next slide, please. Similarly, we look at the plan indicators and targets. So in addition to the system performance items, Onto 2050 also establishes its own indicators and targets that track the region's progress along the priorities that the plan lays out from a policy level. And so there are 40 indicators, or there were 41 indicators. We took a look at all of them. We refreshed the methodology, I believe, on 8, and we retired one that was having to do with public health that we were never able to get good information on consistently. And so CMAP updates these every year because it's important for us to have ongoing intelligence on the way the region is moving on some of these issues. And relevant to the conversation this group was just having, I think we all know that our traffic fatalities are going in the wrong direction in the state and in this region. And that spurs us to action through our safety action agenda and other safety related work. Similarly, we know transit ridership is way down due to COVID-19. That has also spurred us to do additional work through our mobility recovery project. And then similarly, across all the indicators that we track, this gives us intelligence on where CMAP needs to be putting our efforts. Next slide, please. Additionally, the team prepares the financial plan for transportation, which is another required part of this process. And so the financial plan is not a budget. The financial plan is a policy prioritization exercise that happens sort of concurrently with the RSPs and the other activities and has a reciprocal relationship with the system performance stuff and the RSPs, because basically what we do is it's a policy exercise wherein we ask, all right, and forecast out to 2050, how much will it cost to administer, operate, and maintain the system that we have? And that also includes an assessment of what would it take to achieve state of good repair across all our assets. That's on one piece on the expenses side. We also ask what system enhancements are needed to meet regional policy goals. That's things like investments in ITS or bike ped facilities. And then finally, what would be the cost to build the new capacity that's being proposed by implementers as regional priorities? And so we have in the one column, on the expenditures column, we have all of those things. And then on the revenue side, we take a look at all of the resources that come to us from the state, the federal government, and anywhere else that we can get to fund the transportation system, and kind of compare these two lists and then think about what are a list of items that the region may need to make progress on financially over the next 30 years to be able to continue to fund and support the transportation system, that we have and that we want to grow into in the future. And so an example, like a practical example of how this reasonably expected revenues piece works is that for many years, CMAP recommended that the motor fuel tax be increased and indexed to inflation. So that was a reasonably expected revenue for the last, prior 3 plan cycles. And so fortunately, through actions of the state and the advocacy of many of you, through the Rebuild Illinois capital plan, the state did just that. So we moved the MFT resources into our baseline revenues and continue to think about what other sources we might need to get new revenues from in the future to be able to continue to operate, maintain, and improve the system that we have and the system that we want. So it's really much more of a conceptual exercise than it is like a capital improvement plan level budget. But all of these pieces work together for us to be able to understand the 30-year time horizon picture of what the needs are. Next slide, please. And then, finally, two other pieces that are happening concurrently. One we were just talking about is updating the TIP. And that's more of the short-term, closer to the ground investments that are on their way and happening. And of course, while all of the project selection processes that we administer consider the policy priorities of Onto 2050, many funding programs have additional considerations, such as, for instance, CMAP. Next slide, please. And then finally, Russell and the team also need to take a look at everything in the RSPs and the TIP and demonstrate that they conform to the region's established vehicle emissions budget. Conformity means that that the long-range transportation plan and the TIP will not cause new violations of national air quality standards, cause any worsening of existing violations, or delay efforts to attain air quality standards in a timely manner. And so kind of all of these together are the sort of technical pieces that we need to do. And then there's also, next slide, please, efforts that the team undertakes, not just to have a million meetings with all of you, which I thank you all for participating in while we were figuring out what projects needed to come forward for the RSPs and what's the back and forth there and what's the updated cost and all of that. So there's that engagement, but we also do public and stakeholder engagement. And so the last 2 months, CMAP has been holding a number of virtual roundtables to share with people what it is that we're doing when we update the long-range transportation plan and ask questions about the experience of COVID, and then also where people see the region going and what their questions, concerns, hopes, and so forth are about it. And then finally, we've asked particularly to our more civic and public sector partners, what new analytical tools and decision-making processes can CMAP use to better evaluate policies and projects in the future? And this is kind of getting to scoping for the next plan. So, but just before we go on to that, things that we've already been talking about are, people seem to be talking a lot about increased freight activity, increased warehousing and land use, and concerns about how to manage that from a truck routing or even a governance standpoint. People are concerned about the future of retail in the face of e-commerce. And people are also very concerned about what is going to happen to the transportation system as a result of greatly increased levels of remote work. So these are the kinds of conversations that we've been having in these roundtables with residents and others. And that'll kind of bring me to what we're hoping to do, which is the next slide, is talk with you all a little bit about where we might want to go from here in terms of the successor plan for Onto 2050. If you'd rather talk about any questions or comments you have about what I've just shared, since it's fresh, I guess it didn't occur to me when I was putting this together that maybe the order of operations is questions and concerns, and then any thoughts about where we go from here. This is just a fun rendering our vendors Urban Lab did for us for the last cycle that I don't think ever got used for anything. So here you go, light of day. Yeah, so I'm going to stop talking. I've talked enough. Let's have discussion if you would like.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. That was a lot, but a great overview of all of the work that you've done until now and what we're looking at here in the draft plan that's going out for public comments. Maybe I'll start us out with some observations about what you shared and what you're asking here, and then we'll hear from folks on the committee. So, on the transit side, we've been working with CMAP in many of these elements that are in the plan. And I think it's worth noting that we kind of made a decision with CMAP, as they had made the decision not to change the major policies of the plan, that we weren't going to try to capture the implications from COVID on transit funding and on transit ridership in the long range plan, partly because the long range plan continues to be long range. And we all sort of hope that we'll eventually get out of the pandemic and return or go to some new normal that is yet to be determined. And partly just because it's very hard to do right now. So on the financial side, we had kind of assumed that the operating cost of transit, as Elizabeth showed, would be kind of status quo, let's say, and that on the capital side, that we were basically estimating the cost of maintaining the 2020 backlog of transit projects. So again, sort of not improving things, but kind of keeping them the way that they were. So the costs that are in there represent that kind of view of the world. Not ideal, but kind of practical. And on the ridership side, she showed that indicator with transit, unlinked transit trips, and the fact that we had this aspirational goal in the long range plan to double 2016 ridership, which is already aspirational. And now we're currently carrying about half the number of people still that we carried before the pandemic. So obviously we are further away from the goals of the long range plan than we were before the pandemic, which we know, and it is, I think, sad, but I think that's part of our job, is to figure out how to change that. And I guess when I'm thinking about both how we frame the Onto 2050 update and how we think about scoping the next plan, I'm thinking about those things and thinking about how do we want to really think about what new aspirations look like in the future? And I don't know the answer to that. We're going through our own strategic planning process now with many of you, as I mentioned earlier in the meeting. So I'm not sure entirely where that will go, but one example is that I think ridership might be something that we lean less on. And this idea of forcing transit to prove its worth through the number of people who ride it. We don't really do that in the highway space. We don't really do that elsewhere. And so I'd like to see us be able to say, how are we providing access and mobility to people across the region? And how are we doing so in a way that may accommodate the fact that people work from home? And that's okay. That's maybe good if people are working from home and not having to travel every day. But also reflecting what we heard earlier in the meeting about, or in some of the highlights that you're pointing out in the beginning of this presentation, Elizabeth, about aging communities and what it looks like to provide mobility in communities as many people age and maybe don't have the same form of mobility that they've had in the past. So as I'm thinking about the next plan, that's where I'm headed, is thinking about how we accommodate transit as a form of mobility and not as something that needs to prove its worth constantly through the number of people who are riding. So any thoughts on that, Elizabeth, before we take comments from others on the committee?
That's completely right on and good perspective. And I guess I'll just share, for us, the timing of when we have the responsibility as the MPO to do these activities sort of is what it is. It's prescribed. And we knew that we were actually, just really getting started in earnest when COVID hit us, and we had really hard, time figuring out what changes were going to be durable and what weren't, and we just kind of had to proceed, and we did the best we could. And I think we're still not in a final kind of condition.
Yeah, really good point. So thoughts or questions from others on the committee about the overview that Elizabeth gave, or about the question about scoping the next plan?
Audrey.
Hi, I had a question about your slide about the travel demand model, which I know is a centerpiece of this work. Two questions. One, does the travel demand model you are using now incorporate induced demand, which means increasing capacity means that you're assuming that it will increase vehicle miles traveled? So that's question one. And the second is, there was a bullet that said expanded mode choice options. So could you expand upon what that means in terms of how well this model works for biking and walking and transit?
So I can start us off, but I'll just be honest and say this is a very technical practice area that is not my area. And I can promise, here, let me say a couple of things. I can ask if anybody else here from the team on the phone would like to add anything. And then Audrey, we can follow up with you with more detailed information and the committee if folks are interested afterwards. Okay, first off, my understanding of the mode choice piece is that they're working to incorporate TNC behavior into the model. We already incorporate transit, but the model does not do a particularly good job, or I think any job at all, if I'm not wrong, on modeling biking and walking mode choices. Although the My Daily Travel survey does include information about those modes. And we did a series of, I think, 3 or 4 policy updates last year, talking about what the findings from that were. You know, if people are interested, just as a plug for that analysis. And in terms of induced demand, I think the answer is complicated. And let me just ask, yeah, if there's anybody else from the team who wants to jump in here.
Yeah, hey Elizabeth, this is Craig. I can
Thanks,
add
Craig.
to that. Let me turn my camera on here. Hey everybody. So yeah, I'll just correct one thing that you said in terms of the mode choice. The updated model does include walking and biking trips in terms of sort of the origins and destinations of those trips. It doesn't really take it beyond that point. It does also include TNCs and taxis, as well as, you know, other just auto and transit trips. In response to Audrey, your question about induced demand, you know, there are a few ways that the model does account for induced demand. So one way is through, you know, changes in travel modes. Obviously, if there's a large project that adds capacity on the highway side, we will see people making different choices. So it does have the ability to have people shift from transit or non-motorized modes to auto trips. A second way it accounts for, you know, induced demand is people having the ability to change the time of day that their trip might occur. So for instance, somebody who may leave for work extra early to try and avoid congestion may decide to make their trip a little bit later in the day, more within our sort of normal AM peak period, if they have a path that now has suddenly new capacity that's been added to it. And so the model does account for that as well. And then it also does account for diverted traffic, which is just the idea that if there is, you know, a section of highway that does have an add lanes now, it has the ability to have more throughput. So people who were taking an alternate path will divert to that path if it is going to save them time on their trip. In terms of kind of the larger issue of, you know, increased capacity, just sort of spontaneously generating new trips, that's not something that travel models can do by themselves. Within the sort of larger framework of the activity sim land use model, working together with the travel model, it does have the ability to do that. So for instance, travel times from the travel model feed into the land use model so that in future scenarios, it sees if there's improved accessibility between locations, and that in turn impacts you know, development and housing location, and it all leads to changes in overall travel behavior. Those are very long-term effects. And so for I'll say specifically for the RSP evaluations, we did not have time to run sort of a full set of feedback between the land use model and the travel model. So that part of induced demand is not necessarily going to be reflected in the RSP project evaluations.
Thanks, Craig. Could you just expand a little bit more on the bicycle and pedestrian and how that's handled in the travel demand model, and whether you can analyze, if you were developing a pedestrian project or a bicycle project, how that impacts the whole travel system?
Sure. So Within the mode choice model, basically it looks at a number of different modal options. Like I said, there's walking, biking, SOV, HOV, transit, as well as TNC and taxi. For each trip, it determines, the utility that the user would derive from taking that. So things that feed into it are things like, on the transit side, things like fares, travel times on service, wait time, that kind of stuff. For the auto side, it's more about travel time, the cost of operating the vehicles. But it comes up with utilities that a person would derive from using each of those potential modes for a trip. So for non-motorized walking and biking, it looks at those within the overall context of the other modes as well, and it will determine that this trip's going to be made by a non-motorized mode, this will be made by transit, etc. So that's as far as the model will go for the non-motorized modes. So it'll provide us information on origin destination pairs and time of day and what trips are going to be made by the non-motorized modes. But a regional model itself is not really designed to sort of get into the routing aspects of non-motorized trips. But so from sort of a larger perspective, we could see what kind of impact that a large set of improvements would have on changing the shares of those kinds of trips that the model is predicting is going to be made. It's not necessary. This regional models don't do a good job, though, of sort of getting into the specific, project level impacts of non-motorized. So it's not really designed to evaluate, on-street bike lanes or bike paths, that kind of thing. We really need other tools to do that.
Thanks, Craig, for that response, and Audrey for the questions. Other questions from the committee?
This is John. I would just make just a point out that, with any of our capacity expansion projects, we are aggressively putting in sidewalks and bike paths as part of the IDOT's Complete Streets policy. So, automatically with any project that does have that type of stuff, it is adding those elements where they're appropriate, where there's support for it, which is virtually everywhere, in District 1. So, to suggest that all we're doing is adding lanes out there and that's just going to change some sort of dynamic that doesn't account for multiple and other modes is not correct. We really do put, virtually every project, even our smaller intersection projects, they all include and incorporate new and improved, sidewalk and bicycle pedestrian accommodations. So I don't know what does that do now? So now you have the ability to do these multiple modes. So now people are going to be able to utilize them, which is a great thing. That's going to induce a new demand that the traffic model is that going to be able to also capture that, to say, hey, there are people that are going to be taking these new modes that are making these new connections and stuff. So I don't know if that helps the conversation, but it should share some perspective and maybe context to that aspect of the project. So just adding that.
Noted, John. What I'm hearing, I think, from Audrey and Craig's response and your response is that the next plan should include more discussion about bicycle and pedestrian movements and projects, and understanding how we can invest some time and efforts into modeling that more effectively and providing projects that will make it more possible. Other questions, thoughts from the committee? Not seeing any other questions right now. I'm sure folks will need to take some time to read through the 500 pages in the appendix and the lovely summary that sits on top of that. Elizabeth, we're not taking action today. You're just sharing this for information. This will go to policy committee next week, as you mentioned, and it will be out for public comment, and you will be back to us to, I guess anyone on the committee can, of course, can and will, I'm sure, submit public comments, and then you will be back to us to tell us about what you heard and how you've changed things later in the summer.
Yep, absolutely.
Correct summary of where you started?
It is, and we're going to be having pre-planning conversations for the next plan, I'm sure with all of you over the next year or so. So I just ask that you start kind of percolating a little bit about where you think we could do new policy development, we could do new tool development, what are emerging issues in the region that CMAP should be putting our energy to, as well as, kind of to Jessica's point, places where we need to continue to develop our practice, such as with our bike ped and kind of non-SOV mode, non-SOV, non-transit mode investments, among other things, obviously. And then I guess just on the public comment, I'll share, everyone is of course welcome to submit an official public comment. You're also very welcome to, reach out through Doug and Lindsay, or send any of us a note saying that you want to have a discussion about something. If you just want more information, or if you have a point of view that you want to register with us, we can take informal comments, we can take public comments. Anytime you want to spend with us, or any thoughts you're willing to give us, we're very appreciative of, kind of throughout this process, because of course, CMAP tries to be in a mode of continuous improvement, and part of how we do that is getting the perspective from the field from all of you. So really appreciate you taking the time and giving us your input, and in addition to just participating in the process more broadly. So yeah, that's that. And just recap the kind of key dates. Next time I'm coming back is September 16th. The hearing will be August 11th. And we'll be looking to hear from you all between now and then. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, everyone. Look forward to talking more about this over the summer. All right, let's go ahead and move on to item 6.2, which is a overview of the draft federal fiscal year 2023 to 2028 TIP. For this, Kama will be joining us.
All right, good morning, everyone. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Doug. So what is the TIP? Seems like a pretty basic question, particularly for this committee. But every 4 years, we're reminded that there's more to the TIP than just the list of projects that we regularly amend here at this committee. The Transportation Improvement Program actually describes how we conduct the metropolitan planning and programming process in the region, and it is a tool for collaboration between government agencies and a way for the public to track the use of local, state, and federal transportation funds in our region. Next, Doug. In addition to providing information about projects, which is done through the ETIP database, the TIP has to be fiscally constrained and conform for air quality. It needs to make progress toward achieving our performance targets, and also must be consistent with and implement onto 2050. Finally, the TIP needs to be updated at least every 4 years, which is what we're here talking about today. So if you'll go to the next one, Doug, diving right into the updates that were made in the document itself. Chapter 2 of the TIP actually discusses the relationship to onto 2050. Although the goals of onto 2050 haven't changed, as Elizabeth noted, this chapter has been refreshed to reflect how we've begun to assess progress toward our performance targets and to reflect changes to the plan's regionally significant projects. Chapter 3 of the TIP discusses the resources available to the region, which of course we all know have changed pretty significantly since we adopted the FY 2019 to 2024 TIP. We have Rebuild Illinois and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Next, Doug. The methods used to select projects for inclusion in the TIP are discussed in Chapter 4 of the document. Since the adoption of our last TIP, the region has implemented changes to how we program surface transportation funds. We've made modest updates to CMAQ and TAP methodologies. With the enactment of both Rebuild Illinois and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the selection methods for other federal and state programs have also evolved. This chapter also reports on the status of regionally significant projects since the federal fiscal year 2019 to 2024 TIP was adopted. The discussion of transportation conformity within the TIP is largely unchanged because updates are documented in the air quality conformity analysis appendix of the plan update, which is linked within the TIP and which Russell will talk a little bit about in a moment. Next slide. Finally, Chapter 6 of the TIP discusses our procedure for amending the list of projects that's included in the TIP. As you'll recall, this committee in particular specifically requested that we add some greater detail to this chapter of the TIP. So while nothing has really changed about what constitutes an administrative, formal, or conformity amendment, or the requirements for staff, committee, and public review of proposed amendments, a section was added to the document describing the submittal and approval process. Next. At a high level, the steps for submittal and approval start with the submission of new projects or updates to existing projects. The first action staff takes is to determine just what type of amendment the submittals fall within, whether those are formal amendments that need to come to this committee or if they're administrative in nature. Next, staff verifies that the summary description of the changes are accurately reflected in our amendment reports. If the scope of a project has changed, meaning the location or work types included in the project, staff will verify the project's exempt status, as well as its potential to influence performance targets. If the cost of a project has changed, particularly if that cost change is to the amount of state or federal funding being utilized, staff will verify that the change was approved by whatever entity is responsible for programming that fund source. For example, changes to STP funding or CMAP funding need to be approved by CMAP or the appropriate council of mayors. If it's ITEP funding that's programmed by IDOT, then they would have to approve a cost change before that's accepted into the TIP. Staff also considers at a pretty high level how reasonable cost changes are based on the scope, schedule, or other changes that are proposed. When new projects are submitted, the staff review is a bit more rigorous to ensure that the project does support the implementation of ONTO 2050, that the information provided is logical and accurate, and that the proposed funding is available within the region. During the change review process, staff may make minor corrections to information provided by the programmer. Staff can also deny submittals to allow programmers to provide additional information, make major corrections, and then resubmit their request. The administrative changes that are accepted by CMAP staff immediately become part of the approved TIP project list and are posted to the ETIP public website. Formal and conformity amendments that staff accepts, as you know, are held until the amendment period is closed. Those are compiled into a draft amendment report that this committee takes action on, just as we did this morning. Following committee action, there is actually one last step, and that's through an ETIP workflow process. CMAP actually requests that IDOT accept the amendments into the state transportation improvement program, and then that Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration approve that amended state transportation improvement program. Next. So wrapping up with the updates for the document at this time, there are 3 appendices. Those were all updated. Overview of the ETIP database just reflects minor functional changes that have occurred. The fund sources appendix was updated to include new sources from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, such as the Carbon Reduction Program and PROTECT programs. We also have documented what sources of funding are currently expired and are now considered historic. The format of this appendix was also refreshed a bit to provide some more clarity for our readers. Finally, the work types appendix was reorganized to group work types by the mode and type of work. For example, we've grouped the work types by like highway maintenance or transit expansion to try and kind of group together those work types and make it a little bit more public friendly. We've also added some descriptive text of the work types to provide clarity around differences between similar sounding things, like the difference between adding a new through lane to a project or just adding additional pavement width to existing lanes. So the public and lay people often describe both of those as widening, but honestly, they have very different implications on both mobility and air quality, as this group knows. So next slide, Doug. Just like the plan update, the tip will be available for public review and comment concurrent with that update from June 10th through August 13th. As noted within the draft document, there are some sections that are likely to be updated before the document is finalized. In particular, if any changes are made to the ON to 2050 update that affect the tip, those changes will need to be reflected here. Also, we expect that we'll have some more complete information about new programs included in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act before this document is finalized in the fall. So like the plan update, the document will come back to the committee in September for consideration for a recommendation that the Board and Policy Committee approve the FY 2023 to 2028 tip in October. That was a very quick summary of the updates to the tip document. It's a pretty dry document, but also a very important one. So just wanted to make sure that we hit the highlights. And as Elizabeth said, anyone wants to chat both now or offline about anything in particular in the tip document, we're happy to do that.
Thank you, Kama. Appreciate the overview. Any questions for Kama? Questions or thoughts on that? Right, no questions right now, but be sure to check it out and reach out to her as she suggested with any thoughts over the summer. Thanks, Kama. Well, let's go ahead and move on to item 6.3. We're now talking about the ON to 2050 update and 2023 to 2028 tip conformity analysis and tip amendment for that. So Russell, we're back to you for that, I believe.
We are back to me. All right. Included in your packet today is the ON to 2050 tip conformity analysis and tip amendment 23-01. To help provide some context on the conformity memo, I have a very brief presentation to give. So next slide. All right, so our region is a non-attainment area for ozone. The 2008 ozone standard that you see there on the right side of the screen, that was recently redesignated, I think on May 20th, to attainment for the 2008 standard. So prior to that redesignation, we had to attain in our region both the 2008 and the 2015 standards. Now that we have attained and being officially redesignated by EPA as attaining the 2008 standard, we only have the 2015 standard to adhere to. Currently, we are marginal in terms of our ozone classification. There has already been a federal notice that has been published to bump the region up to moderate. And at the current pace that we are going, it's unlikely that we will attain the 2015 standard. So we will likely be bumped up to serious in 2014, which was actually our current standard for the 2008 ozone before we actually got redesignated to attainment. Next slide, please. All right, so I don't know if you can see this. It looks a little small on my screen, but basically these are all the monitors in our region. And anytime you see a number associated with a monitor, that means we have violated the 2015 standard. So these were all the monitor readings and violations that we had last summer. This summer, the ozone season is off to a slow start. We haven't actually had any ozone violations. We've come close. We haven't had any this year. How this works, though, is any monitor that has an exceedance that would be 71 or above 4 times, that monitor is considered to be in violation for the entire year. As you can see, we actually have 5 monitors that are actually in violation. For the region to be in non-attainment, it only takes 1 monitor to be in violation. Next slide. And we also have 1 monitor that is actually not in Illinois, but is typically called the controlling monitor for our non-attainment area. It's just on the other side of the border in Wisconsin. It's called the Chicago-Milwaukee monitor, just a little bit above the Zion monitor that we also have. So as I said, the region's design value, that's the critical evaluation. The design value is the 3-year average of the 4th highest reading in each year. The region's current design value for 2020, actually looks like a typo. It should have been, I think, 2019 to 2021 let me backtrack. The current design value today is 73. And that's before we actually have had any ozone violations this summer. At the end of last summer, the region's current design value was 75, which is well above the 70 threshold. So while we're at 73 right now, and we haven't really had any ozone season yet, so it's only going to go higher than it is right now. So even if we don't have any more violations this summer, we will still be in violation of the ozone standards because of all the past violations we've had and how high those violations were. The 3-year moving average will still be above the 70 threshold. Next slide, please. All right, so what is it that is important about conformity for this group and for the public at large to know? First of all, it's required under the Clean Air Act. So this is not something that CMAP does just because we think it's a good thing to do. It actually fulfills a regulatory obligation that the agency must do. Projects of air quality concern in the TIP and or the Onto 2050 RSP. So all your RSPs go through the conformity process unless they are strictly maintenance. We might have a few of those. And then any project that has a not exempt work type in the TIP. And there's a whole bunch of work types that we have. And if a project selects one of the not exempt ones, then it is subject to the air quality and transportation conformity process. In order to do this, we must use the latest planning assumptions. So as Onto 2050 is updated with land use and the socioeconomic forecast, so too is the transportation conformity process then influenced by those updates. And then we must use the US EPA approved mobile source emissions modeling. And prior to where we're at today, we were using what's called the MOOS 2014A model. In November of 2020, US EPA released a new model and they published that notice in the Federal Register in January of 2021. And that model is called MOOS 3. As a MPO, we are not required to switch to MOOS 3 until January of 2023. However, we thought that it made more sense to try to get MOOS 3 up and running and to do all the testing and to create new data sets and all the checking that we have to do so that we could try to use it for the plan update. So that the plan update would be done using the most current model with all the latest assumptions that go into emissions modeling. And we were able to do that. So the conformity memo that it was included in the packet and that will go out for public comment along with the TIP and the plan uses the MOOS 3 model, which is the latest and greatest US EPA approved emissions model. There are some changes though that this model incorporated. So there are new regulatory changes. So whenever there's a new regulation that's been approved, the model actually, because these things are only updated every 6 to 8 years, doesn't always capture that. By using the new model, we have captured all the new regulations that have been put forth that the model actually captures. It has new features. It has a lot of new data. It has new algorithms. It has new ways of calculating emissions and accounting for emissions. A lot of that's based on real world testing that the US EPA does. So they are constantly refining and improving and retooling the emissions modeling process. And this model is a result of that. Improvements to the heavy-duty diesel running emission rates and the impacts of the heavy-duty greenhouse gas phase 2 rule, and the safe, affordable, fuel-efficient vehicle rule. That's basically what we refer to as your miles per gallon for cars. All of those things that have changed over since the last time that MOOS was done are incorporated in the new model. So that changes some of the emissions calculations, and it also means that you can't always compare one model to another because there are different assumptions that are built into the model, a different regulatory framework that the model captures. And then finally, vehicle starts and idling activity was improved based on a lot of real world testing that the US EPA did. Next slide, please. And that's it. That's a quick one. So what's not in the slides, and it is detailed in the memo, and it's detailed in the page turner of a conformity appendix, which is comes in at a nice robust 27 pages, which is really short compared to the travel demand documentation, which is north of 100 pages. We switched to a new model. At the same time, as I already mentioned, the region was being redesignated for attainment for the 2008 standard. As part of that redesignation, Illinois EPA had to demonstrate that they will maintain attaining the 2008 standard through 2035. So that means we had to add 2035 as a modeling year, and the conformity document that is included in the packet now has 2035 as one of the modeling years. As part of that, we also had to develop a new budget because we didn't have a budget for 2035 or for the ozone, the 2008 ozone maintenance SIP, which is now what it's called. So we have a new budget for the years 2035 of new motor vehicle emissions budget, years 2035 and beyond. And we have the same budget was unchanged for all the years before 2035. So in the conformity document, 2025 and 2030 modeling years are under one budget, and 2035 and everything else is under the new budget. So this was approved and in the Federal Register notice that was published on May 20th of 2022. So we have a new budget. We have a redesignation to attainment. We have a likely bump up for the 2015 standard to moderate and then soon to serious. And we also have a new MOVES model. So there's a lot that has been going on in the last several months related to conformity and trying to do it as best as we can. And with that, I will take any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Russell, for that thorough yet quick overview. Question for you, just so I'm clear about this. So we are currently, I'm going to use the wrong language, but conforming to the 2008 standards, not the 2015 ones. And when you project into the future for the purposes of the plan, we are within budget, or we are conforming. So what's happening between kind of like what is causing the model to think we'll be in conformity when in fact today we are not?
So this is a tricky and complicated thing. So when we do transportation conforming, we have to demonstrate that we will be conforming. So it's a modeling exercise. It's a mathematical exercise. And we always demonstrate that we will be conforming. And remember, this is just for our part of the overall ozone picture. So we only are talking about the mobile source, the basically cars and trucks and all that driving around in the region. So our part of the budget, we are conforming to. When an ozone monitor goes off, it's for anything that's causing ozone, the cumulative effect. So that's the real world on the ground stuff, and that has a lot to do with weather conditions at the time. And it has to do with things like point source emissions from factories and from power plants and things of that nature. So what happens is the Illinois EPA develops a SIP budget, and they parse out parts of that budget to different sectors. The sector that we get, which is our motor vehicle emissions budget, which is some of the stuff I just talked about, we are conforming to our portion of the budget. So you could make an argument that other portions aren't, or maybe in totality it's not. It's not always clear, but how it works is we're giving a budget. We demonstrate through our modeling process that we conform into the future, that we're not causing new violations, which I believe has been, or making things worse, which I think was already presented multiple times. Monitors react to real world conditions though, and real world conditions have a lot of variables in it that we can't model when we're looking at things for an entire year or even the month of July or something of that nature. So there's always been a bit of a disconnect between the modeling exercises, and that's what we're required to do, and what the monitors actually read. And because of what the monitors actually read, that means that if we're not in attainment, which is currently the status, we are not in attainment of the 2015 standards, we keep getting bumped up and we have to do more things. So one of the things that people are familiar with is taking their cars to the Secretary of State's office or whatever it is, the thing, and getting the tailpipe checked. That's a direct result of us not being in attainment. That's one of the inspection and maintenance program is one of the things we have to do because we're not in attainment. As we get bumped up, there will be more things the region has to do and more restrictions placed on emissions and pollution and things of that nature. So we're not there yet, but potentially we would be there in about 4 or 5 years. So I don't know if that answers your question. That's kind of the best I could come up with on the spot.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's helpful. part of the reason I asked the question is because I think in the same way that we've been leaning into talking about safety and the safety issues and how our decisions affect safety, I think it would be helpful for us to talk a little bit more about air quality, because I know I've heard you come present on this a few times, and every time you do, it's a bit of an eye-opener that there really are a lot of air quality problems in our region, and whether they're affected by transportation or other sectors, as you say, either way, there is an air quality problem, and our models are saying that we're going in the right direction, but reality is saying we're not. So I think it would be good to spend some time in our agendas over the next year doing that if we can.
Yeah, and just for a little context, roughly the amount of emissions for ozone, even greenhouse gases that are generated from mobile sources is about a third of the total emissions that are generated in the region. So even if we cut, that in half, that's still, cutting a third in half. So it's significant, but it's not the full picture, and we need to do what we can, but realize within the context of what impacts we can have.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we'll take a note to do that. Doug and Lindsay to maybe get some more conversation on future agendas on this. I know we're getting up to 11:30 and we have a couple more items, so I'm going to go ahead and continue to move us on to item 7, legislative updates. I understand we don't actually have any updates, but staff are available if the committee has any questions. Any questions on the legislative front from anyone? No, hearing none. All right, let's go ahead and move on to item 8, other business. Is there any other business that committee members would like to bring forward at this time? Oh, other business. All right, on to public comment. We have, I know, one letter that we received today that Doug is planning to read into the record. If we have any other public comment while Doug is doing that, if anyone else would like to make a public comment, go ahead and let staff know in the question and chat box, and they will let me know. So Doug, why don't we go ahead and share the letter that we received?
All right, so I'm actually so the letter was from Stacy Myers, who's actually in attendance. I don't know if she wants to read her own letter. That may be more appropriate. I'm gonna unmute Stacy, and she should be unmuted now.
Thank you. Actually, I would, if you don't mind, that would be wonderful.
Fantastic. Yep. Please.
Can you hear me?
We can. Yes.
We can.
Wonderful. My name is Stacy Myers. I'm senior counsel with Open Lands. We were founded in 1963 to protect natural and open spaces in northeastern Illinois, the surrounding region, to ensure cleaner air and water, protect natural habitats and wildlife, and help balance and enrich our lives. Thank you for considering our comments on proposed amendments to the region's TIP. We recognize that a continued focus on revising the TIP will be part of the onto 2050 update process, and we look forward to engaging you in that capacity. Overall, we agree with our colleagues that a greater focus should be on regionally significant transit programs, and we should continue the philosophy of fix it first in any recommended road projects. This is especially true both for the safety and for the air quality concerns that have been voiced and that have been grappled with by this committee, as well as the need for nature-based solutions for climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution in order to meet our 30 by 30 in America the Beautiful goals. We're glad to see the removal of Wilmington Piatone Road project from the roster of constrained projects in the TIP amendments that was before this body. Based on recent recommendations in the Moving Will County reports that were funded and overseen by CMAP, thank you, we agree with clustering freight and truck routing to confine impacts so that TDL complements globally significant natural areas within Midaywan, as well as high quality natural areas such as the Des Plaines Conservation Area and Jackson Creek watershed. We see the need for caution in any approach of improving I-55 that could seriously degrade these resources if not done consciously to protect the delicate conservation values that run against the current highway, which is promised to the U.S. The same is true for any improvements to Arsenal Manhattan Road through Joliet Training Area, which is promised to the U.S. Forest Service as part of Midaywan. The proposed expansion bounds Jackson Creek watershed, which flows into Midaywan. We look forward to any study that engages experts to ensure these resources, like Wet Mesic Dolomite Prairie, one of the rarest ecosystems in the world, are protected. While today's agenda involves amendments to the existing TIP, this presents an opportunity to review what is also in the unconstrained list to ensure recommendations are still timely and relevant. We strongly urge this committee and CMAP to remove 3 projects from that list, which are outdated, outmoded, and have been officially terminated due to court proceedings. The first is the Ileana Tollway. Since IDOT agreed to remove this from the state TIP, and after environmental studies for the project were invalidated in federal court, this should carry through to the regional TIP, in that the reference of the project should also be struck. This would be consistent with the most recent land use plan that was overseen by CMAP and funded by it, moving Will County. We appreciate that the project previously was removed as constrained, but it's now time to also remove it from the unconstrained list. For similar reasons, I'm hurrying here, references to the Tri-County Access Project and the FAP 420, a corridor that would actually cut through the eastern part of Hackmatash National Wildlife Refuge, should also be removed from the unconstrained list and not included in the update to Onto 2050. The Tri-County Access Project was canceled by the Illinois State Toll Highway Authority, and since then, the state legislature authorized a task force, of which IDOT sits on, as so do we, thank you, to develop alternative uses for the corridor as a greenway. Any Route 153, 120 studies from decades ago are now defunct and no longer reflective of the priorities and needs for the region. We see that transportation improvement project, it still exists for improving Route 120 along its given path, and similarly to our comments on I-55, express that caution will be needed to be taken, not to impact the adjacent Liberty Prairie Reserve, which is a mosaic of protected landscapes. The placeholder FAP 420 in McHenry County from decades ago, before the dedication of Hackmatack as the first bi-state national wildlife refuge in the country, should also be struck for consistency's sake. And given that the region has moved on, we respectfully request these projects are taken off the books. Thank you once again for your time and kind consideration.
Thank you, Stacy. Comment so noted. Do we have other public comments for the meeting today? Doug or Lindsay?
Yeah. Yes, we do. I'm unmuting Barbara Cliff.
Good
Barbara,
morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me okay?
We can. Good morning, Barbara.
Good morning. I had intended to give public comment to piggyback onto Stacy and Open Lands comments requesting the removal of the Tri-County Access Project. We currently have a General Assembly task force sitting to consider alternative uses for the corridor, so it seems that it is timely. It was removed both for cost and for lack of public support for the project, so we would request that you remove it. But I want to thank Audrey for bringing up the safety issues on Route 83, and I just want to bring a couple things to your attention because I live 2 houses away from that intersection. So that is at Route 83 and the intersections of Casey Road and Midlothian. It changes names as it crosses. And on that corner is the Metro area with 2 Metro train lines, the Milwaukee North and the North Central lines. And I almost was run over there because there was a crosswalk with no light. It was winter, it was 6:30 in the evening. I was wearing dark clothing. Someone went to make a right turn on red while my daughter and I were crossing, and we were almost hit. I contacted my county board member, and he had to work with the state, the county, and 2 villages, because one side of the road is one village, one side is the other village, to get a light put on that intersection. And it seems like it should have already been there when you have 2 public transit stations. The other thing is it's a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit there across from the access to 2 public transit stations. I requested a speed study, and they returned it and said it was perfectly safe. I don't understand. I'd love to see the list of criteria you look at to determine safety, because I don't understand how a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit across from 2 public transit stations would be safe. And the last thing is that road runs directly adjacent to the Liberty Prairie Reserve, and as it's widened, it will actually cut into the Liberty Prairie Reserve. there is daily roadkill on that road. Just yesterday, a turtle or a tortoise that must have been a 14 or 16-inch shell was smashed. A couple days before that, a fox and a baby fox was on the side of the road, so we had to call wildlife rescue them. I think they're trying to get to the water ditch on the south side of the road along the metro tracks. So I just wonder if you consider wildlife when you're running against a protected area like that, when you determine your speed limits as well. So I just wanted to throw that in as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Barbara, as well. Comment also, so noted. Do we have other public comments today, Doug?
Yes, I just unmuted Ethan Salzberg.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Hi, we can, yes. Welcome, Ian.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you again for hosting this meeting, for allowing public comment. I will keep it brief. When discussing arterial widening, listing the RSPs, a member of this committee was focusing on pedestrian crossings, for example, to highlight the safety benefits of these proposed projects. And I remember there was discussion about preventing mid-block crossings, installing turn islands to slow vehicle speeds. And I think that these are great aspects of road safety design, but the greatest safety concerns that come from increasing lane miles are higher vehicle speeds, which encourage more unsafe driving. We can upgrade pedestrian crossings, slow turns, install separated sidewalks and bike trails without adding vehicle lanes to these arterials. I've listened to the discussion today, and I simply don't see how building more road space for an existing vehicle count won't encourage speeding and more reckless driving. This could increase the number of vehicle crashes as well as induce demand, increase vehicle miles traveled, and as we just heard, increase emissions. I'm interested in how we can use the existing space that we have now to look at projects like narrowing traffic lanes, which actually makes drivers more cautious in slow speeds. Use that space that we have for things like wider sidewalks, physically separated bike routes, pedestrian crossing islands. This is how other North American cities, as well as cities around the world with much better road safety numbers than ours, are designing their roads. And I'm frustrated that we don't seem to consider what our peer cities have already learned and started implementing. And instead, we're stuck in this idea that giving drivers more space is the magic solution to road safety, and that enforcement, education, and posting a lower speed limit will actually prevent reckless driving, which they don't. And simply slapping sidewalks and bike lanes on a widened, dangerous road does not address the root causes of this danger, which is reckless fast driving and increased vehicle emissions from higher vehicle miles traveled. So I guess my question is, can this issue be addressed with building actual complete streets, Vision Zero focused designs, instead of just widening roads and adding safety improvements on as an afterthought? And I'd especially, given the last comment, would like CMAP to focus on these roads that look and feel like high-speed arterials, but that run through densely populated neighborhoods that have lots of pedestrians and businesses. And a lot of these roads are often under IDOT jurisdiction, which leads to a lot of resistance from IDOT to reallocating road space for safety. So thank you for listening, and hope this can be addressed.
Thank you, Eaton. Appreciate the comment. Doug, do we have more comments as well?
I'm unmuting Garland Armstrong. Except he's, oh, there he goes.
Yes.
He was self-muted.
Hi, Jessica. Hi, everybody from Chicago.
Hi,
it's Garland Armstrong of Des Moines. And after listening to it, I agree, because the way the safety issues, especially the cars are driving like at a high rate of speed, and then there are people who are crossing like sometimes when I'm crossing the street, they don't even watch where they're going because they're in a rush and don't know why. And I'm also wanting to make sure the update, the one in Tinley Park, by 159th Street in Oak Park, are they still in progress of trying to get some sidewalks there? Like whenever we're coming back as vacation visitors, like going to the church or even the Golden Corral or even up to Aurelio's, because that is a dangerous street and that could be waiting for an accident to be happening or an incident or hit and run scene, because even though if I'm crossing, but they all feel like they're all in a rush and we don't know what to do and they feel like they want to leave the scene of an accident. So are they working on it to make sure that that's a big safety issue? And has anybody went out there taking some pictures of it to see how bad it is right there in Tinley Park by 159th Street and Oak Park Avenue, so that they could see the reality of it and see what they could come up with a processing system and making sure that the pedestrians are safe and everything is safe?
Thank you, Garland. Appreciate the comments. Doug, do we have other public comments
Nope,
today?
that is it for today, I believe.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for the thoughtful comments. We will have those on the record. And Doug, I assume we will share the letter that we received from Open Lands with the committee as part of the minutes from this meeting?
Yes, we will.
Yeah, great. All right, let's go ahead and move on to item 10. Our next meeting will be July 29th at 9:30 a.m. And seeing no other business before the committee, we will go ahead and adjourn. I don't believe I need to take a motion. Do I need, Doug, do I need to?
Yes.
Okay, motion. Do I have a motion to close for today?
Tara
So moved.
Orban, second.
Great. Thank you. Motion and a second. Voice vote to adjourn.
Aye.
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 Hi.
Fantastic. Our
Aye.
meeting is adjourned for today. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
So everyone have a good weekend.